On first down, the handoff to Marlon Mack. Huge hole, 50-yard line. He's at the 40, still going near sideline. He's at the 10. He's at the 5, and he will score. Touchdown, Marlon Mack. Touchdown, INDY. And again, it's picked off. It's Darius Leonard. Leonard with a second INT, and he's streaking down the near sideline. He's at the 40. He's at the 30. He's at the 20. He's going to go. A pick six for the Maniac.
Horseshoe is back, baby. The horseshoe is back.
Hey, what's going on, Colts Nation? Welcome back to the Bringing the Juice podcast. Colts have just released their roster cuts. They just have cut it down. Their final 2020 roster cuts. I have Andrew Thomason joining me. Andrew, how are you doing, my friend?
I'm well, Cody. I'm doing very well. And I'm sure similar to you and everybody else, I'm excited to break down these roster cuts with you.
Absolutely. So let's start with some of the players that were waived today. Cornerback Andre Chikari, I think that's how you say it. Defensive tackle Cameron Klein. Tight end Dominic Daphne. Guard Jake Eldrenkamp. Wide receiver Darius Fountain. Tight end Farid Green. Defensive end Gary Green. Wide receiver DeMichael Harris. Offensive tackle Brandon Hittner. Wide receiver Marcus Johnson. Quarterback Chad Kelly. Center Chase McLaughlin. Tackle Carter O'Donnell. Center Javon Patterson. Cornerback Lafayette Pitts. Cornerback Jackson Porter. Cornerback Travis Reed. Safety Donald Rutledge. Cornerback Tremont Smith. Tight end Andrew Vollert. Defensive tackle Chris Williams. Defensive tackle Robert Windsor. Some other players who were released. Tight end Xavier Grimble and center Joey Hunt. So, initial reaction, Andrew, to this roster. It looks like the Colts will start with the quarterback. Looks like they kept three quarterbacks. The three quarterbacks that we expected them to keep. What is your reaction to this?
Yeah, it's no surprise to me, Cody. I think when you consider the draft pick that the Colts spent on Jacob Eason, it wasn't very high, but I mean, a fourth-round pick is, in my opinion, considered a quality draft pick, especially in the later rounds. And you don't really know what you have in Jacob Eason. I mean, you saw a little bit, or the Colts reporters that actually were at training camp saw a little bit from Eason. From what I understand, he played pretty well given the circumstances, or I guess the circumstances necessarily of playing with like third and fourth string players.
Right.
But he's got a heck of an arm from what I understand. And Chad Kelly, I mean, he's a nice player. He had a nice preseason 2 preseasons ago, but to me, it wouldn't have made any sense to hold on to Chad Kelly over Jacob Eason.
No, not at all. And that's kind of where we're at. Like, this is what we expected. You know, Chad Kelly, he had a decent preseason last year, but overall, you know, he wasn't going to make the final 53-man. Like, it wasn't going to happen, and we kind of knew that. So, yeah, I guess we can move on then to the running backs. Let's look at these Colts running backs so far. So Jordan Wilkins did not get cut, so I think that's a big deal. So the Colts will keep 4 running backs, at least for now. What is your reaction to this right away?
Yeah, I think after they cut, Rosie Nix the other day, that was sort of the indication that I had, as well as many others. And it's not really surprising. Just hypothetically speaking, let's say Marlon Mack has an injury, and you're down to Jonathan Taylor and Hines, who's more of a pass catching back that you typically see on third and fourth downs. And then who's your second running back at that point? And it's got to be Jordan Wilkins. So that to me isn't as surprising, considering, as I said, when they cut Roosevelt Nix the other day, I sort of expected them to keep 4 backs on the 53-man roster.
Right. Yeah, and I think that makes a lot of sense. We saw how valuable that was last year. You know, when Marlon Mack goes down for a game or two, Jonathan Williams, the 4th running back, he has to play, and he plays a significant role. He runs for over 100 yards in back-to-back games. So we see how important that is. Jordan Wilkins can play special teams as well. So that's a huge deal. Let's look at the wide receivers. This was a position, Andrew, that was this entire offseason, we were going back and forth. Who was going to make the active roster? Who wasn't going to make the active roster? Well, today we got some answers, right? So it looks like number 5 will be Desmond Patman, and number 6 will be Ashton Doolin. Now, I know Derek was very upset that Darius Fountain did not make the final 53-man roster. But, I mean, that's what we've been saying, Andrew, right? If you're going to play, you're going to be a number 5, number 6 wide receiver, you have to play special teams. That's just like a need. So what are your thoughts on these guys? I mean, really, I did not think Desmond Patman was going to make this roster when he was drafted, and he's had a strong camp from all indications. Give me your thoughts on this, man.
Yeah, for starters, I'll say I'm a bit shocked. Similar to Derek, I thought Darius Fountain not necessarily was a lock to make the roster, but I think considering the other guys in Patman and Doolin, I figured Fountain, given the amount of reps that he has had over the last couple of camps and how well he has performed during that time span, I think he had a better shot than those other two. And it's not to say that Doolin and Patman can't play. Obviously, they played well enough during training camp, or performed well enough, I should say, to be able to make the 53-man roster. So credit to them, of course. But, I mean, like you said, Cody, it's important that the Colts have players that can play special teams, especially that 5th and 6th wide receiver. If you can't play special teams, if you can't be versatile, then you're probably not going to make the final roster. And the other thing that we've talked about before too, Cody, is that the Colts have a really good problem, and it's a weird way of saying that, but they do. They have a good problem. They have so much depth on their roster to where not everybody's going to make the final 53, obviously, and they had so much depth at wide receiver that it was kind of a coin toss between some of these guys, and I think that Doolin, as I said, and Patman as well, showed up in when they needed to, and they rewarded them with the spot on the 53-man roster.
Yeah, and I think for me, I said initially when I went on here a couple hours ago, I felt like maybe the reasoning behind it was, yeah, Reese has had a pretty strong camp, but would you rather go with a guy with injury history, not as physically gifted, or a guy you just drafted that you know very well and is more, physically gifted and also has had a strong camp by all indications? I think it makes a lot of sense from that standpoint. You feel like as good as Reese has been, Desmond Patman has a high ceiling. I mean, a lot of people were saying Colts got him at a steal in the 6th round. So I'm really excited to see what he does. He's a giant human being. Him and Michael Pittman, 6'4". He's a little bit heavier than Michael Pittman too. So he's a big red zone threat potentially if the Colts indeed use him in that way. So let's look at the tight ends a little bit. I want to look at the tight ends. So obviously the Colts cut Andrew Vollert. So what does that mean for the tight ends then? What are your thoughts overall on the tight ends?
Yeah, to me, from what I've seen already, between Jack Doyle, Trey Burton, and Mo Alley Cox, those 3 were locks going into training camp, in my opinion. And then you have Vollert, who they recently signed, I think, within the last week or so. He's obviously no longer on the roster. And then, I'd keep your eye on Hale Hintages. I'm probably just butchered his last name, so my apologies there. But he's had some experience with this Colts team before. I think last training camp, and I think the Colts really liked what they saw in him. And I know they don't have first priority in waiver claims, so maybe another team will see the potential that maybe the Colts saw in him early last season or early last July. And if not, maybe the Colts come in and they come in and bring him in, because Trey Burton's injury cannot be understated, or my apologies, understated enough. I mean, he's going to be out for at least a couple of weeks, and now you only have Jack Doyle and Mo Alley Cox, and it's not to say that they're not good players, but injuries happen in the NFL, and if either one of those guys goes down for an extended period or even a short period of time, then you have to almost bring in a 4th guy just for security reasons.
Yeah. And that was my thoughts too. I was like, really? I thought the Colts were going to keep 4 tight ends, no doubt, and they kept 3. I know there's been some discussions about Danny Pinter, who had played some tight end when he was at Ball State, but I don't know how much he actually is going to play a significant role. Or in terms of multiple plays per game that he's actually going to line up at tight end. But I definitely think this could potentially indicate that the Colts are looking elsewhere at kind of the guys that got cut at the tight end position. And I would not mind Hale Hinches. I was a big Hale Hinches guy last year. I was upset when he got cut and claimed, and so this could be a great thing for him. He's a very reliable type of player, so I would be excited if the Colts got Hale Hinches, honestly. All right, let's move to now the offensive line. Now, the Colts only kept 8 offensive linemen. I thought they might keep 9. They only kept 8. They obviously kept Costanzo. They kept their 5. and then they added, kept Larry Clark, obviously Danny Pinter, and Chaz Green was one that I was really surprised about that the Colts kept. What are your overall reactions to the Colts keeping 8 tight end or 8 offensive linemen rather?
Yeah, like you, Cody, I thought they'd keep maybe 9 or even 10 offensive linemen. Some people may think that's crazy, but the offensive line depth going into training camp was, it wasn't good. It was bad. And, I think that's sort of where I got that from, that idea of keeping 9 or 10. I'm sure you and others as well, just because of the depth is so important. The Colts were incredibly fortunate to have as healthy of an offensive line as they did last year. And in the NFL, injuries happen. If a starter goes down, you have to be able to have a reliable backup. And last year, it wasn't as concerning because you had the reliable backups in Joe Haig and Josh Andrews and others. This year, you don't have that. And so, guys like Jake Edrinkamp and I can't think of the other, Joey Hunt, I was sort of maybe surprised that they were cut because they're more of the guard center backup, whereas Chaz Green, LaRaven Clark, and I guess Danny Pinter's a center guard. To me, Danny Pinter, LaRaven Clark, pardon me, from what I understand, had tremendous camps. So kudos to them. I think they absolutely deserve to make the roster. Chaz Green, I was a little bit surprised at. I figured they'd maybe keep another guard just because I think tackles are important, but I think guard is just as important, if Nelson or Glowinski were to go down. But 8 is not bad. I would have liked to have seen that number a little higher, though.
Yeah, I know. That was weird to me. Like, I thought that they would keep – they did a few things that I thought were not what I expected. Like, they kept 3 tight ends when I felt like they should keep 4. They kept only 8 offensive linemen when I felt like they were probably going to keep 9 or maybe even 10. Probably 9 was my guess. So all these things were a little bit, odd to me. But I actually want to welcome in Jim Aiello from the Indy Star. Hey, Jim, thanks for joining us, my friend. How are you doing? Oh, is he can you hear him, Andrew?
No.
Okay. Yeah, there's some technical issues. I know. It's weird, but I still can't hear you. I don't know what the deal is.
How about now? Is that better?
Oh, perfect.
There we go.
I'm a technology idiot. Sorry. I think I had the microphone off.
Oh, you're good, man. No, we were just discussing – actually, we just finished talking about the offensive line, and we were just actually talking about a little bit of surprises, like the Colts only keeping 3 tight ends and also only keeping 8 offensive linemen. What are your reactions to that?
Yeah, so the offensive lineman thing, I didn't have them keeping more than 8. I think that's what they're going to do. I'm a little surprised at the one they picked, Chaz Green.
Yeah, I know.
It's not that he didn't play that well. He just didn't play a lot because he was a little bit banged up. But the thing about him is he's got some starting experience. It isn't good. If you ask any Dallas Cowboys fans, they're going to tell you he was terrible. But they can move him around. He's got some versatility. And the thing to maybe keep an eye on, or why this might make sense, is because Anthony Costanzo's got that oblique injury. You got LaRaven Clark, obviously, but maybe you want a little more depth at the tackle spot, just in case there's something going on with Anthony Costanzo. Again, the Colts haven't indicated that, and that doesn't mean they can't, cut Chad Green and bring in somebody else or do some other stuff right now. Again, I think we put a lot of focus on the 53-man that changes. It'll change tomorrow. So there could be some evolution here coming, but that's kind of my instinct on the offensive line for sure.
Yeah, absolutely. We can move over now and look at the defense a little bit and kind of discuss this. So the defense, they kept 9 defensive linemen. They kept, obviously, DeForest Buckner, Justin Houston, some other guys that they kept of note, Danico Autry, Al-Qadim Muhammad. Tyquan Lewis had a strong camp, so they kept him. Right. Sheldon Day, and Ben Banogu too. Sheldon Day was a question that I had a couple times. Like, is he going to make this roster? He's been hurt all this time. I think with the release Robert Windsor, I was a little bit surprised at that, honestly. And I know you tweeted that out too, Jim. Like, he was having a strong camp. And then they also kept Taylor Stallworth over him too, which was interesting. What is your reaction to that? Because I was a little bit surprised, honestly.
All right, let's start with Stallworth. So Stallworth versus Windsor is what it ended up coming down to, and pretty much it becomes down to position. Stallworth plays nose tackle. He's the backup nose tackle to Grover Stewart. I almost said Grover Cleveland. That would have been fun. Grover Stewart. And he's the backup nose tackle there. They don't really have anybody else on the defensive line that is that big and that can kind of play that spot. So that's kind of the explanation you're going to get for Stallworth. Whereas Windsor, Again, I am surprised, but again, you only have so many spots to give out on that defensive line. They already kept 9, like you said. And I thought he had a really good camp. He showed a lot of quickness. The thing they told us when they drafted him was that he was going to be really fast. He's going to have better penetration skills than you'd expect. And he really did. I mean, the guy was kind of blowing up plays in the backfield a couple times. He just kind of flashed a lot. Therefore, I thought he was going to make the team. I'm not, ashamed to admit I had projected him to make the team. I actually had projected Sheldon Day. But I think what they're going to do with Sheldon Day, at least is my guess, is that because IR has new rules this year and you can only have to go on the shelf for 3 weeks and then they can bring you back, I think they might do something like that with Sheldon Day, put him on IR for 3 weeks, and then they can, again, elevate somebody. Now, we can get into what you were talking about before. Maybe that's a 4th tight end. Maybe that's another defensive tackle, and they elevate somebody else. But, again, it could be a bunch of different things, I should say. But right now, like I said, I think they wanted to keep Sheldon Day. I don't think they wanted to worry about exposing him to waivers, despite the fact, like you said, that he's been hurt. So they keep him on the team, and then my guess is they'll maybe throw him on IR and then fill that roster spot.
That makes sense. Yeah. Okay. And then we can also look at the linebackers that the Colts kept. They kept, obviously, Darius Leonard, Bobby Okereke, and Anthony Walker. The reserves that they kept, which was interesting, and I think kind of expected, they actually were able to keep both Matthew Adams and Zaire Franklin, which that was kind of a question. Will one of them get cut? I thought probably Matthew Adams if I was choosing, based off of what we heard, Zaire Franklin having a great camp. And then, you keep EJ Speed, who we know was is a big time freak athlete type of guy,
yeah.
Right? I mean, he's just insane. Like, he's off the charts. And then an interesting one that I had back and forth, Jordan Glasgow, 6th round pick out of Michigan, primarily going to be a special teams guy. I thought that was interesting that they kept a lot more linebackers than I thought they were going to keep. What are your thoughts on that, Jim, and Andrew too?
Yeah, I'm stunned, honestly. Like we were all trying to figure out, okay, which linebacker are they going to cut? And then maybe will they keep 5 and cut 2 of them? And all of a sudden there's 7 of them. And this is the team that, by the way, I know their base package includes 3 linebackers, but this is a team that plays often with 2 linebackers. I mean, we all know how good Kenny Moore is. He's the nickel corner. He's out there a lot more often than in the slot, I should say. I know he plays on the outside in the base, but he plays in the slot, and they have 3 corners out there a lot, or multiple safeties. They don't play a lot of linebackers. So to keep 7 is a lot. I'm with you. I was going with Zaire Franklin over Matthew Adams, mostly because Zaire Franklin is a really good special teamer. He had 6 tackles last year, which was 2nd on the team. He's been obviously we kind of saw during some of the movement stuff going on within the Colts. He's clearly emerged as a leader in that locker room. So again, that was the reason I thought Zaire Franklin was definitely going to keep his job. Speed, I think, has too much physical ability to get rid of. I think they like the way he's developing. So that was a guy I definitely thought was going to make it as kind of that 4th linebacker. And then Glasgow was a guy, like you said, special teams ace. It turns we haven't talked about Bubba Ventrone this year, the special teams coordinator, but we did hear from Matt Eberflus, who said that Bubba's been loving working with Jordan. So that was kind of a hint as that, okay, they drafted him for this. It's working out really well. We think they're going to keep him. And so to me, like, again, getting back to what you were saying, I thought Matthew was the odd man out. Mostly because Matthew is familiar with the defense and does play well in the defense and the linebacker. I just didn't. Where's the snaps going to come from? That's my question.
Right.
I mean, you're going to get Darius on there. You're going to get Bobby. You're going to get Anthony Walker. And you're going to get maybe EJ Speed some snaps on the defense. I don't know where the rest of the snaps are going to come. So obviously Matthew Adams will play some special teams, but I think he only had 1 tackle last year. And again, tackles aren't be-all, end-all of measure of your special teams contributions. But I just thought if somebody was going to get exposed to waivers, it would have been Matthew Adams. And again, I'm going to keep repeating this. This roster situation is fluid. It's solid, locked in right now, but as of tomorrow, it could all change.
Right. Exactly. Yeah. And I guess before I move on to the other thing, one thing I have note, Kamoko Toure, he was placed on PUP/reserve list. So what do you think this means for him and his availability whenever he's, can get back onto the field?
Yeah, 6 weeks minimum, right? So he's out for the first 6 weeks, which stinks for the Colts because let's be honest. I mean, they have some interesting pass rushers, but they don't really have anybody with the speed and bend of Kamoko Toure. He's kind of their best. He does that the best of anybody on the team. Obviously, they have guys they like. They'll have Justin Houston still. They'll still have Ben Banogu playing on the end. Tyquan Lewis has flashed as a pass rusher, and again, that's just the guys who are going to stay maybe on the outside. The interior with DeForest Buckner should be fine as well. So losing Kamoko Toure. It's not as big a deal as I think it was last. A big deal. I still think they need a speed rusher like him, but I think they're playing it safe with him, and I think that's probably the way to go. A guy with the injury that he had, you don't want to rush him back onto the field, and you don't want him to be, even 80% effective or as effective as he was last season, that's a good way to shoot a kid's confidence. And I don't think you want to do that. So you put him on PUP, make sure he's fully healthy. He's working with Robert Mathis. I see him every day we go into practice. He's standing over there with Robert Mathis, talking to him. He's definitely taking in as much information as he can and trying to learn. And so I think, like I said, I think they're just playing it safe. But unfortunately for the Colts, he'll miss the first 6 weeks. And that's going to be a blow to the pass rush.
Yeah, for sure. Andrew, what are your thoughts on the linebackers? And let's talk, and we can throw in Kemoko Turay here too. Give me your thoughts on all this and how that's going to impact the Colts here.
Well, as Jim mentioned, I mean, I was sort of shocked at Zaire Franklin as well. Similar to you guys, I thought he was kind of the odd man out. And I obviously ended up keeping, 7 linebackers. Let me go back to just double check that list real quick. Yeah, I mean, I don't want to just repeat everything Jim said. I completely agree. I think, Jordan Glasgow, special teams guy, I think they, as you said, Jim, they drafted him for that reason solely, and he performed well in training camp, and so I think he deserved a spot on that roster. And then Matthew Adams, as you guys both have mentioned, he's sort of also a special teams guy in a way. But I think I'm trying to think. I lost my train of thought. Sorry, guys. It's roster depth on, especially particularly in the linebackers, I think is something that Chris Ballard has tried to sort of hold on to since he started his tenure in 2016, pardon me. And I think that when I'm trying to think of how I want to phrase things, because I don't just want to repeat everything that Jim said, but I think I think that it's interesting. It's interesting. I thought this, keeping 7 linebackers was a bit much, but maybe obviously Chris Ballard and company and Eberflus thought that it was needed. As far as switching gears here to Kemoko Turay, Jim said it's a big loss. I mean, the game that he had in Kansas City last year, he was explosive. He was, certainly, I think, on the NFL's biggest stage, Sunday Night Football, when you have so many people watching, he certainly showed up in a lot of key situations. And then he went down with that ankle injury towards the end of the game, which was kind of a bum way to end the game. You come out with a victory, obviously, but then, you lose your soon to be what we think is a star pass rusher for the season. So losing him for 6 weeks is certainly noteworthy. But I will say is Al-Quadin Muhammad, in my opinion, I think is one of the underrated pass rushers of this team. He's not really a speed rush guy. I think he's more of a power base, kind of like a Justin Houston, but he's certainly somebody that if I were to choose between Banogu, Houston, and Muhammad, he would certainly be my choice to certainly fill that role on third down of Kemoko Turay for at least the first 6 weeks.
Yeah. And that we can talk about that for a second. That other defensive end position, it's been a question mark all off season. There's been, you've seen different guys in there. What are your thoughts on who you think kind of you would like to see and you think potentially Jim has the advantage going into the season to potentially be the starter alongside Houston?
Yeah, it's the guy that's kind of overlooked by everybody all the time. And it's kind of like, when they let go of Jabal Sheard, everybody was like, well, what are they going to do? What are they going to do? And I think the Colts were like, did you guys watch Al-Quadin Muhammad last year? Because he was pretty good. Yeah. And he was. And they're not wrong. I mean, he's definitely developing as a pass rusher. That's kind of coming more in his game right now. But he was really good against the run. They really liked what he was able to give them. I think they're going to be fine replacing Jabal Sheard. I think they're going to be, again, there's no replace. Like we talked about this before. Andrew mentioned it too. There's just no replacing Kemoko Turay. They don't have anybody like him. We saw what he did in Kansas City, a guy that's able to get to Patrick Mahomes like the way he did. That those guys don't grow on trees. So there's not going to be an easy answer to that. But like I said, Matt Eberflus likes to cycle in 8-9 guys. He's going to keep them fresh. And again, I don't think you're going to see guys play very much. I don't know. I'm trying to think of the way to say it, but you're not going to see a lot of guys play a lot of snaps other than maybe DeForest Buckner. Denico Autry will cycle to the outside a little bit and the interior. It's just going to be kind of a by committee situation. It's kind of the way that Nick Sirianni talked about replacing Trey Burton the other day. It's not like you just plug in another tight end and then he runs all the routes and you call all the same plays. No, you kind of replace it by running a little more three tight ends or 3 receiver sets and having some of the those slot guys run the routes that you're going to have Trey Burton run. It's going to be similar on the defense in that you're just going to have guys fill in and rotate in, and you're going to try different things rather than just saying, hey, somebody, you take Kemoko's spot, you be the speed rusher, because they don't have anybody like it.
Oh, yeah, For sure. And I guess I'm curious, since the Colts elected to keep Sheldon Day, do you foresee Taylor Stallworth kind of being that backup one technique position to start the year?
Yeah, absolutely. He's the backup nose. I don't really think that they're going to – it's one of those – I know they say that anybody that make the team is going to play. I wouldn't expect to see a ton of Stallworth out there. I mean, he's been fine in camp. My colleague at Indy Star, Joel Erickson, has been pretty impressed with him from what he's seen. So, again, I don't think you see a ton of snaps from him. You don't need a second nose in there. I mean, maybe in a jumbo defense goal line kind of thing, you'll see both him and Grover in there. But Grover's going to get a lot of those snaps mostly, and then they're going to get guys who can penetrate. That'll be Tyquan, that'll be Forrest, and Sheldon when he's eventually healthy.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely.
Sorry,
go ahead.
To catch up. I have a quick question for Jim. You guys were able to obviously go to some of the Colts beat reporters to the Colts training camp. What did you see from DeForest Buckner against that first-string offensive line? From what I understand, he absolutely dominated, but I just wanted to get your perspective because you were actually there in person.
Yeah, so I mean, it's hard to we didn't see a lot of like one-on-one matchups between like him and Quentin like we were hoping. They just didn't really have a lot of those battles at practice. But we did see DeForest kind of shine was in that second half of the second scrimmage game at Lucas Oil Stadium. That was kind of the one where you were like, oh, that's why they traded for this guy. This is kind of crazy. Like he can start all of a sudden he can start making a great offensive line, a great interior offensive line, like Ryan Kelly, Quentin Nelson, and Mark Lewinsky. Those three, he starts making them look like kind of below average players. And the way he gets into the backfield, I mean, he's just, it's strange to watch a guy who's so smooth, who's that big. I mean, you just don't see athletes like that, at least not playing football. Most of those guys are playing basketball. So he's so tall, so big, and he's so fluid. It's kind of impressive. And then he'll tell you this, he's just gotten, again, and I'm no defensive line coach, but his technique is so refined for a guy like him. I mean, he really, really can make you, again, he doesn't just rely on his athleticism, kind of like he did a little bit earlier in his career. He's smart. He kind of sets you up on certain things and then is able to take advantage a little bit later. So DeForest Buckner is as advertised.
That's great to hear. Yeah, I mean, that's what the Colts have needed for years, right? Like we've talked about that. Immediately when the Colts signed DeForest Buckner, I'm like, he's the best three technique they've had in the past decade. Like, they just have not had anybody that can provide in that caliber. And so absolutely, he's going to be a force up there. And it's telling when, you said the first team offensive line, obviously one of the best in the league, I would argue the best. And to see him still making plays like that, that's still got to get you excited, because they always, that old saying, iron sharpens iron, man. Like they're continuing to make each other better. And I think that's just incredible. I think both these units, man, I think just playing against, for this defensive line especially, and seeing them going out there and making plays, playing against one of this top offensive lines in the league, I mean, that's just got to be great for their confidence. It really does. Because there's a lot of guys with a lot of potential that have just yet to show it. And that's something that I've talked about this whole offseason, right? The whole, potential versus actually, playing and production, I guess is the word. So it's certainly exciting to see them definitely early on making an impact. All right, let's move to the corners, okay? So Colts kept 5 cornerbacks. They kept Xavier Rhodes, Rocky Ascend, Kenny Moore, that's your top 3, TJ Carey, Isaiah Rodgers. So they only keep 5. What are your thoughts on the 5 that they kept? I mean, I think this is pretty cut and dry for me overall for what I kind of think they were going to keep. What are your thoughts on it, Jim?
You know what? I guess I'm going to get bold right now. I'm going to say this is an unfinished product. I think there's still a chance that they add something to this unit, to this group. Maybe. I mean, I just don't know how good you feel about your outside reserves right now. I think they really like TJ Carey, but I really think he's more Kenny Moore insurance, and he'll be fine in the slot. They won't fall to pieces like they did last year when Kenny Moore was out. I think that's what TJ Carey is supposed to provide. But Isaiah Rodgers being the next guy, he's another small guy that's probably going to be better in the slot, who's still learning how to play, the NFL defense and learning his way around Matt Eberflus's defense. So right now, I just don't feel like they're as deep at outside corner as you want to be. And again, this wouldn't be a problem if Marvell Tell hadn't opted out. I mean, they had a good kind of developmental outside corner there, and he opted out. And again, no problem with that. You understand exactly why he did it, but it kind of put them a little bit behind the 8 ball in terms of outside depth behind Xavier and Rock. And again, we know Kenny can play outside, but it's not where you want him. You feel like you kind of lessen the player a little bit if you slide him outside more often than he should be. So it's one of those things where I think they might look. I don't know. I see 7 linebackers, and then I see their lack of outside corner. depth, and I kind of think maybe there's a possibility. Again, I'm not saying it's definitely going to happen, but I just there's certainly room for improvement at corner. Where again, if you look around the rest of this roster, I wouldn't say that no reasonable room for. You can't really complain about many holes on this roster at any spots, depth or otherwise, or starters. But I do think that in terms of the outside cornerback, that might be your weakest spot in terms of the depth behind the two starters. And again, we're not even sure what you're going to get out of Xavier Rhodes or Rock, really. I mean, again, Rock had a pretty good second half of the season. Xavier has been a Pro Bowler before, and he's reunited with some coaches that helped him succeed in Minnesota. But he was not very good the last couple of years in Minnesota, and there's a reason they let him go. So if he's that guy, that's a problem, and they'll need to address it. So I'm a little uncertain about their corner depth, but we'll see going forward. And again, with 7 linebackers, they have some flexibility.
Yeah, I know some people have been talking all about Sidney Jones, who is a former second-rounder of the Eagles. He's expected to get cut. And then Rasul Douglas, who's a third-round pick for the Eagles. Do any of those guys potentially pique your interest? I feel like Sidney Jones is kind of an outside type of corner, boundary corner. I don't know a ton about him, admittedly, but a lot of people have been clamoring for him so far. What are your thoughts on that, Jim?
Yeah, like I said, I actually today I checked out the scouting report on Sidney Jones when he came out because he was a second-round pick. He's actually a guy that people thought might be a first-round pick when he was coming out. I think it was 2018 and of the Philadelphia. Yeah, so 18, 19, 20, right? Or is it 2017? I don't know. I think he's played 2 or 3 years. I can't remember. But he's been a disappointment. He's been hurt. But he does kind of fit the traditional Ballard mold. He's a taller corner foot. He tackles pretty well. Again, that was the reputation that he had in college. He hasn't put a lot on tape in Philadelphia, and what he has put on tape hasn't been good. Again, there's a reason Philly's cutting bait right now. So that's a guy. But again, you talk about a tall corner who could use some good coaching and playing a little bit of depth. And again, that's a guy who just needs to change his scenery. From what I understand, the Philadelphia thing is just brutal for him right now. Fans have kind of crushed him because he's been a disappointment, and they've struggled in the secondary, so he's kind of bore the brunt of it. Definitely, it seems like a guy who could use a change of scenery. I'm not saying definitely go get Sidney Jones, but I'm interested. Again, there's a reason the guy was a second-round pick. Clearly got some talent, and again, he has those physical tools that Chris Ballard tends to like. So maybe that's a guy that I definitely would be intrigued by.
Yeah, for sure. And it's going to be interesting to see as as teams continue to finalize their 53-man roster. I do think there are some positions the Colts are going to add to. You mentioned corner, but potentially I even think tight end. Hale Hinchis is the name that I know he's been linked to the Colts. He was there last year. And potentially even offensive line still. I feel like there could potentially be some tinkering in there, especially with Chaz Green. Like we talked about, you don't see him a bunch for a reason. I feel like potentially there could be a move there. But we'll move on to the final position, I guess, before we move on to special teams, the safety position. Now, this one wasn't much of a surprise to me. I mean, initially I felt like when they signed Tavon Wilson, the Colts were going to keep 5 safeties, and they end up doing that. They keep, obviously, Hooker and Willis, who you think will be your starters immediately, George Odom, a key reserve, Tavon Wilson, who I mentioned, and then Julian Blackmon, who was just activated off the PDP a couple weeks ago. So overall, what are your impressions of these safeties? Do you think these 5 safeties will probably be what the Colts keep pretty much throughout the season?
Yeah, I don't see any reason to get rid of any of these guys. And again, the way Matt Eberflus likes to use safeties, he's kind of like, it's like the defensive version of Frank Reich with tight ends. He loves having a ton of them. And he loves using them all. Again, I wrote a story, I think, earlier in the year where they ran a lot of sets, a lot of plays last year with 3 tight ends on the field. They actually ran a couple with 4. So they love getting their safeties on the field. And they have some good ones. I mean, obviously Malik Hooker is in a kind of a prove-it year, and he's going to be your center fielder, and Kari's the strong and is going to be kind of playing near the line of scrimmage and stuff. But really what Matt Eberflus has said, and he kind of wants the defense to take that next step in terms of or the safeties, to take their next step and be capable of doing a little bit more. So for Kari Willis, that's maybe playing a little more center field where he's played some man-to-man and done it well, and played near the line of scrimmage and done it well. Okay, now can you go play deep in his zone and play that well? For Malik, can you play near the line of scrimmage, or can you match up man-to-man? Can you do those things for us? That's what they like out of Tavon Wilson. He can do a little bit of those things. George Odom isn't probably going to be asked to do a ton of that. They really like him as a pass down specialist. So he'll be kind of the guy that floats, maybe a little bit of man-to-man here and there, but they love what he does on special teams, and they love his abilities in coverage. So that's what they're going to ask him to do. And then we're saving, I'm not saying the best for last, but the guy who's certainly the most versatile in Julian Blackmon. This is a guy that played some corner in college. They actually liked him as a corner when they were scouting him earlier in his career. And then he moves to safety, and they're like, oh, he's pretty good there too. So they really like the idea that he can do all of those things. He'll match up with some tight ends, maybe help with the running backs, maybe even slot. I mean, Andy Eberflus said the other day, there's some slot receivers they would feel comfortable having Julian Blackmon match up with, which is a really exciting thing for for Eberflus to be able to say is that you can get a guy who's as good a tackler as Julian is up near the line of scrimmage up against a slot corner or a slot receiver who probably won't be able to block him. So again, that just gives them more options, more things that they can do. Once he's healthy, I can't wait to see the way they use him. I think he's going to be all over the field. I'm not calling the guy Derwin James just yet, but I definitely think they're going to use him in a way that they're just going to say, oh, he's way over, he's up near the line of scrimmage and he's blitzing, or oh, he's way back. I mean, it's going to be fun to see the way Matt Eberflus tries to use him once he's healthy. But yeah, this is a team that uses their safeties really well. I can't remember the exact stat, but I think 4 of those guys had over 200 snaps or more. So they're going to play a lot, all 5 of these guys.
Yeah, and I know Tavon Wilson played a little bit of linebacker when he was with Detroit, so potentially that could. I mean, that's why I was kind of surprised the Colts got that many linebackers, because I'm like, Tavon Wilson can kind of play some linebacker for you. So really you can kind of count him as like an 8th linebacker if you need to in a pinch. So that was really interesting to me. But yeah, I think overall there was a few surprises on this Colts roster in terms of offense and defense, but not really like huge ones. And you're right, Jim, like there still is some construction that's going to happen. This isn't fine-tuned. This isn't probably every single player is not going to be on the roster week 1 when the Colts kick off in Jacksonville in 8 days. So, but certainly a good, starting point for the Colts. So let's look at some of these guys. Let's look at the special teams guys first, and then let's talk about some of these guys who were cut, potentially, their chances on the practice squad and moving forward. First off, let's talk about the kicking position. This has been a position battle throughout the entire camp, and I was completely shocked when I found out the decision the Colts made. I mean, we've talked about it on here, Jim. Like, I know, my word. Like, Chase is a veteran. Give him the nod. He's they're pretty close, but I would have probably given it to the veteran. But here we are, and Hot Rod's your kicker. What are your thoughts on that?
I'm surprised. Like I said, I thought Hot Rod had to go out and win the job to take it away from Chase, because you already knew Chase was a pretty good kicker, given what he gave you last year. I didn't see Hot Rod win the job. This is where I'm going to start making excuses. Ready? This is the point where you say, hey, we weren't at practice every day. We didn't see them kick every day. What we saw was at Lucas Oil. We saw those two rounds of the kicker competition, which Chase won. I think he was 12 of 15, whereas Rodrigo was 11 of 15. And in those, to me, it wasn't really that close for me. I saw the misses that Chase had seemed a little bit closer. He seemed to kick the ball with a little more power. I was all aboard the Chase McLaughlin bandwagon in terms of winning this job. So I was definitely caught off guard by this. I guess there's a multiple explanations. One is I just don't know what I'm talking about when it comes to kicking, and that's a very plausible explanation. I'm no kicking expert. So they kept the guy who's going to be the better kicker. I will say, I mentioned this in a story earlier this week. Maybe he's a trade candidate. Maybe this is something like a lot of times you put out so you're gonna waive release a guy, and then before that actually goes through, a team will reach out and says, hey, before he gets the waivers, can we make a deal? And so I don't know. You see like the team like the Patriots, you thought they had their kicker in Nick Folk, they don't. Now they don't have a kicker. I don't know. Maybe you make a trade. Maybe make a swap there and you get some extra value out of it. And so for me, again, this is just going down a rabbit hole of trying to rationalize the thing I thought was right and wasn't right. But Chase is the more tradable asset, in my opinion, just because he has NFL tape. Nobody else has seen him. No other team has seen Rodrigo other than in college. So sorry, I get every time I'm doing the Rodrigo Rigoberto thing, and I'm gonna get it wrong one of these times.
It's gonna be bad, yeah.
Yeah. So I think Chase is kind of a known commodity and therefore somewhat maybe more tradable. So that's just one theory. I have no idea if that's actually what's going to happen. That's just a theory I had about Chase, and about if you were going to trade one, Chase would be the more tradable asset, but you'd have to really be sure what you had in Rodrigo was the real thing. And it seemed, again, you don't, given what the Colts went through last year with Adam Vinatieri, you don't roll the dice at kicker. So they must feel very, very confident in Rodrigo.
Yeah. It was just really caught me off guard. I was I feel like I had a pretty good knowledge of this roster, and then the Colts go out and do things that just kind of shock me a little bit. But Chris Ballard, like you said, he knows more than all of us combined probably about GMing and about football and roster construction and all that stuff. So yeah, we know that he does that. So let's talk about some of the guys that were waived, and let's talk about potentially their chances, I guess, if you will, on being on the practice squad and still contributing to this team, just not on the active roster. Let's look at some of these guys that were waived. Let's look at. I'm just kind of going down the list that the Colts listed. Look at some of these corners the Colts brought in. Andre, I can never say his name right. Chikari, I think his name is. We'll just look at all these corners real fast. Lafayette Pitts, Jackson Porter, Travis Reed, Tremont Smith. Those are the corners the Colts waived. Do you think any of these guys potentially are practice squad candidates?
Oh yeah, absolutely. I definitely think they're going to have to keep a corner or two. Again, we should reiterate 16 guys on the corner on the practice squad this year as opposed to 10 in previous years, and 4 of those spots, 6 of those spots I think can be for veterans. Is it 4? Is it what? 4?
I'm not 100% sure, but yeah.
Forgetting my rules right now. They've changed so many of them. But anyway, they're going to be able to keep more veterans. I think Tremont Smith is a guy that they might be interested in bringing back. Mm-hmm. That's a guy I thought played pretty well and had some nice flashes. Travis Reed is another guy. I think he's an undrafted free agent that they liked. But again, once you get this far down the depth chart, it's going to be tough. They did bring in, yeah, you're right, Andrew Chachere. Again, we haven't heard him said like the name said yet, so I feel bad not knowing it. But yeah, so they brought him in late, so they might, and then they've had Lafayette Pitts around for a long time too. So those are guys that I think they like. But if I had a bet on it, I think Tremont Smith. We saw him run with the second team a little bit more often, I thought, and I thought he played pretty well. So okay. I think he might have the edge in terms of keeping a corner around in the practice squad.
Yeah, for sure. And then they also they released safety Donald Rutledge as well. I'm just going to stay with the secondary. What did you see from him? Do you think he has any chance potentially to be another practice squad guy?
100%. Yeah, that's a guy that I think as long as somebody else doesn't claim him, I think they're going to try. I think they definitely like him. I think what they like about, again, we're talking about a team that loves safeties. So this is a guy that I thought made an impact, both his ability to play a little bit of special teams, but also just a big hitter. The guy likes to hit. He likes to play near the line of scrimmage. I think I'm not saying you can't have too many of those guys. You can, but I definitely think you like what he did in a limited time in camp. I think he's kind of more of a developmental prospect. Definitely think they liked him. I definitely think that they were interested in what he brought to the team, and in terms of being kind of a bigger, not a bigger, but a more physical safety, I guess is the best way to put it. So yeah, I definitely think he's got a chance at the practice squad for sure. Absolutely.
Let's move to the defensive line now. The Colts waived a few different guys: defensive tackle Cameron Klein, defensive end Gary Green. They also waived, I think that's it for the defensive linemen.
Mr. Windsor, you're forgetting Windsor.
Windsor, I'm sorry, I missed. There was another list here: Robert Windsor and then Chris Williams. Out of these guys, who are some you think potentially could be practice squad guys?
You better hope it's Rob Windsor, because otherwise, again, this is one of those things. Otherwise, I don't know what the hell I'm watching when I watch practice. But again, he really did flash, and I thought he had some great plays of penetration, both in practice, more in practice, I think, than in the scrimmages. But definitely a guy. That's for me the number one guy I think you bring back, and you hope you can bring back. We talk about if you're talking about Rodrigo being the number one surprise, for me, the number two surprise was maybe cutting Robert, because I just thought he played really, really well.
Yeah, for sure. So there's
Cody, I'm sorry.
Go ahead, Andrew.
If I may jump in for just a second. Jim, I kind of work backwards here with Malik Hooker and Julian Blackmon. Julian Blackmon being activated recently is obviously big news. Do you think that impacts Hooker? I know he's sort of, as you mentioned, kind of in a prove-it year. Do you think that sort of heightens the expectation, if you will, for him this year with Julian Blackmon? I know what you've seen of him is a very small sample size, but do you think that impacts, what Malik Hooker, in terms of the pressure that he may be put under going into this season?
Yeah, I think the moment that they announced Julian Blackmon as their third-round draft pick, Malik Hooker was under pressure. Honestly, I do. I mean, I think when we saw that, I think a lot of people's instinct was to say that he's taking Malik's job. And again, knowing how often they play so many safeties, it wasn't going to be a direct taking of his job. But then, not that long after, we see the Colts decide not to pick up his fifth-year option. And so, I mean, you don't have to read that. You don't have to really be a fortune teller. God, that was awful. Sorry about that. To be a fortune teller, to read those tea leaves, like they've pretty much drafted a guy that they think can be a starter. They really like Kari. And again, as much as they play safeties, you're going to only probably 2 and 3 guys are going to play the most. So do I think that there's room for all 3 of them on this team to play a lot of snaps? I do, but there's no doubt Malik Hooker needs to be motivated by the fact that they drafted somebody that is a rangy, fast, athletic safety that could potentially start stealing snaps from him once he's healthy. And again, he does a little bit more than Malik. At least that's what his resume says, is he can do a little bit more than Malik. Now, Malik is supposed to be one of the best center field type of safeties in the league, and he hasn't really shown that yet. If he can be that, Well, now they got 3 different types of safeties that can do 3 different types of things, and that's fantastic for the Colts. But to your point, I think the main thing for Malik, I'll say, is Julian Blackmon is motivation, but the main motivation is to stay on the field. The main reason they didn't pick up his 5th-year option was because he couldn't stay on the field. He's just been hurt, and when he's played a little dinged up, and he tends to just disappear a little bit sometimes. So they want him to stay healthy for 16 games and make an impact for 16 games, and then everything will take care of itself, Julian Blackmon or not.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, and sort of as a follow-up question to that, obviously when they drafted Blackmon, he came in with an ACL injury. Pardon me. He's, from what I understand, completely healed, or at least close to it now. Do you think that that's something that the Colts keep in the back of their minds moving forward with Blackmon? Because back in 2017, we know that Hooker had that ACL injury, and then he sort of, as you mentioned, hasn't been able to live up to that expectation of being one of the best center fielders, in the NFL. And so do you think with Julian Blackmon's injury, even though he's, as I mentioned, either fully or partially healed, do you think that that's something that the Colts still keep in the back of their mind moving forward?
Absolutely. We talked to Frank Reich about this. We talked to Julian Blackmon about this. Like, they're not going to rush it. And people say that, and then all of a sudden they're back on the field in a few weeks. And Julian, to his credit, was like, I'm 95% of the way there. But I think with the ACL, that last 5% is a lot. He talked about how, you can get back in 9 and 10 months, which is where he's at. But a lot of guys that he talked to that had the same ACL injury he had, they told him it takes 12 months to feel like yourself. And so 12 months, I mean, he's only at 10. So that add 2 more months to that. And then maybe is he going to feel like himself? Now, again, this is a guy that T.Y. Hilton said is working his butt off to try to get better and try to get back to feeling like his normal self. But again, you don't want to rush it. And you're at a position where you don't have to rush it. They are so deep at safety right now. Again, for all the great things that Julian can be for this team, you don't want to waste it in a week and then all of a sudden he's hurt again and then you got to throw it away because he's done for the year. You just got to give him time. You have time. You have plenty of time and you have plenty of depth that they don't need to rush him back. Again, he's going to be an exciting player, and if he can stay healthy, he'll be an exciting player for a long time. But you got to get him back on the field first.
Yeah, and I think that's something that's really great about the Colts' depth at safety is the fact that you can do that. I mean, I think, when Malik Hooker came back, they didn't have that luxury. Like, he had to be on the field. They had nobody else that could really replace him. And so I think that just kind of speaks, volumes to what Chris Ballard has built here in terms of just depth and also just overall roster talent. I'm curious on your take on this, Jim, because Frank Reich has told the media this. He said, I feel like this is the best roster I've ever had. What are your thoughts on that one?
Yeah, I mean, I think it is. I think we've all go through that routine every year around this time of trying to cut down to 53, and it gets harder. And there's some more guys that you like and guys that you don't want to see getting rid of or get scooped up by other teams. Now, I think, there's always a good measurement of this. It's how many of your players get claimed on waivers and how many of your players are desired on the trade block. And so Chris Ballard will have a good notion of that once he sees, hey, are my guys getting scooped up? Or, hey, are people calling me to trade for some of these guys? So we'll find out a little bit more as the days go on here. But I definitely think this team, I mean, you look around, the linebacker is deeper than it's ever been. There's no doubt about that. Defensive line is deeper than it's ever been. There's no doubt about that. I think this is the best receiver group they've had in years. No doubt about that. So, and running back wise, man, Jordan Wilkins, you got to feel pretty blessed to have Jordan Wilkins as your 4th running back. I mean, that guy, again, I know yards per carry aren't everything, but the guy's at 6 for his career. I think it's actually 5.8, but he's been really effective when they need him to be. There's a lot of positions. We talked about safety where they're very, very deep. Now there's a couple questionable positions, speed pass rusher, cornerback, tight end, places that you want to have a little more depth. But again, we're living in the real world here. You can't have incredible depth at every spot. And I definitely think that in terms of the Chris Ballard era, and as he was remaking this team into what he wanted it to be, this is the deepest they've been.
For sure. All right. Well, let's talk about some of these other cuts that the Colts have made so far. Speaking of that, speaking of having such a good roster where you have to make those cuts, let's look at some of these guys that potentially I thought maybe had a chance at the final 53-man roster. You got to think obviously Reese Fountain, Jake Eldrenkamp is another name. You already mentioned Robert Windsor as well. I thought Andrew Vollert potentially had a chance to make this final 53-man roster with that injury to Trey Burton. And then I kind of thought, Marcus Johnson potentially had a chance to make this roster too. Why do you think the Colts ultimately decided to go Desmond Patman as opposed to a Marcus Johnson?
Oh, because To me, that was an easier call, and that's no knock on Marcus Johnson. Marcus Johnson's a quality NFL receiver. We saw him create some explosive plays in Tampa Bay last year. But again, you kind of know what Marcus Johnson is. He's a fast guy. He plays well. He knows the offense. He's reliable, but the ceiling is pretty limited there. I think that it's kind of speaks to what the NFL thinks of him, is that when the Colts were desperate for receivers, he was still out there so they could go claim him last year. Desmond Patman, I should say, like there are a lot of size speed freaks that go through the NFL and never do anything. And he could be one of them. But what happens is those guys tend to be, very tall, very physical, very fast, but can't run a route, can't catch the ball, can't put anything together. That's not what Desmond Patman is. Like, you watch him go, and I wrote this at one point. There were times, if you took out the jersey numbers, you wouldn't have known who was the second-round pick, Michael Pittman, and who was the sixth-round pick in Desmond Patman. He's not, again, now that's not entirely fair to Pittman. Pittman was going up against starters most of the time, whereas Patman was going up against reserves. But Patman's route running ability is better than people think it's going to be. He's just, like I said, he's not as raw as I think we were led to believe when the Colts drafted him. Now, again, you look at the sixth-round pick, but you also factor in the fact that this was a historically deep wide receiver draft. So he gets pushed down the board a little bit. I feel like I may be too high on Desmond Patman. He's still a sixth-round pick, but I really do think that they like his explosiveness and what the ceiling could potentially be. The other thing is they don't really have another big body receiver outside of Michael Pittman. Like, Frank Reich has been kind of making an effort to try to get a big body guy in here. They tried it with Devin Funchess last year. He got hurt, and they lost that element of their offense. So they have Michael Pittman. Now they have a guy who's kind of like Michael Pittman in terms of size and strength, a guy who's learning to use his body in positioning against smaller corners. I just like that he has he's got such a higher ceiling than a guy like Marcus Johnson. And again, no knock on Marcus Johnson. He's a professional NFL receiver, but the ceiling on Patman is much, much higher.
Mm-hmm. All righty. Well, I think that'll do it for our kind of look at the roster spots. Thank you, Jim, for coming on, man, and kind of discussing and breaking down this roster. I know there'll be some tweaks in the coming week, but I appreciate it, man. Thanks for coming on.
Thanks for having me, guys. I really appreciate it. That was fun. Anytime. As I said, it's fun to talk. Have some news to talk about.
Absolutely.
Appreciate it, Jim. If I may, real quick before we head out, a big fan of yours. A big fan of your work and Joel's and Zach and Steven as well. I'm a journalist over at IUPUI, and I'm about a year away from graduating. So it's to meet somebody in the same line of work that I'm in. It's nice to meet you. Well,
thank you very much. I appreciate it. Hey, if there's anything I can do for you, you got my contact information. Reach out, and I'll try to help in any way I can.
I appreciate that.
All right, see you guys.
Hey, see you later. Yeah. Wow. So there's like a ton of people in here right now, Andrew. This is amazing. I think we have at like 120 at one point. So, wow. Thank you guys. Yeah. That's incredible. But I kind of want to get to maybe some of these comments if we can. I don't know if we can. There's a lot of comments.
Sure. I'm down.
Man, there's so many.
Sorry, you saw me smiling a little bit. I've met a lot of the Colts reporters, and I don't know them personally, but I know them. I've met some of them multiple times, and so meeting Jim for the first time, I just think it's kind of cool. So, as I mentioned with him, somebody that's in the same line of work that I'm in. These are guys that I try to learn from and try to take things away from as a journalist. So I thought that was kind of cool.
Absolutely. There's 112 of you in here right now. Be sure to smash that. Be sure to do that, man. We just got to 3,000. So, I mean, our next goal is to get to 5,000. So if you haven't subscribed yet, be sure to do that. We are definitely coming at you right now with some incredible Colts news. Super excited for this roster and to see what happens here in week 1. 8 days away, folks, from the Colts kicking off in Jacksonville. That's so exciting. We cannot wait. Really, this roster 1 to 53, man. What are your overall thoughts on it? We've discussed in detail a little bit, but how would you, if we can do this, and this is a very it'll change. What grade would you give the Colts roster trim down? I've never done this before. Maybe it's a little bit weird. I'm curious what you think about it, in your opinion.
I give it a B. And the reason I don't give it an A is this. I mean, similar to what Jim said, the lack of depth at the cornerback position in terms of outside corner is a concern for me. And as Jim said, over the next 24, 48 hours, you're going to see this roster, flip. Players are going to come and go, that kind of thing. But that being said, as Jim said as well, with TJ Carey, he's more of a slot guy. You have Xavier Rhodes, you have Rocky Scene, and this is something that I mentioned earlier. Injuries happen. It's the NFL. They're going to happen. It's undoubtedly it's how the league works. And so if you have a guy like a Rocky Scene or an Xavier Rhodes that go down, to me there isn't really a reliable backup. I mean, yeah, you have Kenny Moore that in that base package plays outside, but I mean, like Jim said, do you this is no shot at Kenny Moore, but do you really want Kenny Moore at 5'9" matched up against a 6'4" wide receiver in press man coverage or even in zone? I don't, not me personally, but I just think that's a mismatch is what I'm getting at there. And like I said, that's no indictment on Kenny Moore by any means, but the quarterback position is a bit of a concern. No, we talked about practice squad guys, and I think that they're going to bring in some of those corners that they had cut and put them on the practice squad with the rules being changed because of COVID and whatnot. I think that they have more room to be able to keep themselves in a good place to where if one of these starting corners does go down, you have a potentially reliable backups or players that you can count on, you've seen in person that can potentially work well with Matt Eberflus in that defensive scheme if needed.
Yeah. And Nathan says, I'm shocked that Blankenship won the kicking competition. What were your thoughts, Andrew?
Oddly enough, I was actually sitting at my computer working on some finite homework. Don't get me started on that. And I got the tweet, and I had to stop what I was doing, and I had to sit back in my chair for a minute, and I tried to analyze it. Sounds weird because it's just a tweet, but I had to analyze it, and I thought, I was with everybody else, Cody, with Jim, with you, with Steven, with Zach, with Kevin, all those guys that all probably thought that Chase McLaughlin was a surefire. He was the guy that was going to come in and solely because of experience win the kicking position. And as Jim said, I'm going to do this, I know, with Rodrigo and Roberto. I'm going to mess it up at some point. It's going to happen. Sorry, guys. But with Blankenship, I'll just call them by their last names. With Blankenship, he had to, as Jim mentioned, had to come in and essentially take the job, or at least that's what he thought, take the job from McLaughlin. And I think that when you come in and you've got a guy that has some experience at the minimum in McLaughlin, and you come in, you have to be pretty impressive to take the job from somebody that's already come in at the NFL level. Because let's not forget that Blankenship was an undrafted free agent. He's never played in an NFL game. He's never played in that kind of an atmosphere, whereas McLaughlin has both in San Francisco and Indianapolis. So I was a bit surprised, but I'm excited. I think from what I understand, Blankenship has a heck of a leg, and he obviously earned his way, on the 53-man roster, and it'll be interesting to see how he does come this season.
Yeah. And XRP says you should lock up Fountain and Windsor being the defensive tackle from Penn State. I mean, thinking about the guys, so the Colts, I believe it's 3 guys that you could protect on your practice squad this year. What 3 guys, if you had to choose out of the guys that got cut, would you kind of protect that you wouldn't want any team claiming?
Oh, for me, it's Darius Fountain. Second, it's Rob Windsor. Solely for Rob Windsor anyway. The way that Jim was talking about being there in person and seeing Windsor perform as well as he did, whether it was against I don't remember if he said that if he took any snaps with first team, but I know when he mentioned second and third team, Windsor came in and played really, really good, or really, really well, I should say. And I don't know if that's good news for his overall chances of making the practice squad, or if it's bad news about this Colts offensive line depth, if they're not, or if they didn't play well against a Windsor and some of these other guys as well. But yeah, for me, it's Reese Fountain, it's Robert Windsor, and it is what's his name, Tremont Smith, the corner. Though to me, I mentioned already with the lack of outside depth at corner, I think that's got to be a lock. Pardon me, for the practice squad, and then Reese Fountain. For obvious reasons, I think he had a couple of strong camps. Obviously, he battled that injury from last season. But he's back now. He's healthy. I think he deserves a shot. And then Windsor for the other reasons that I just mentioned.
Okay. Yeah, for sure. Jack asked the question. Evan Boehm just got released by Buffalo. Now, if you remember, Evan Boehm was a backup center for a few years with the Colts. Could you potentially see us bringing him back in? What do you think about that one?
Yes, yes. I mean, I'm glad. Thank you, Jack. I'm glad you had said that. I'm glad that he brought it up. That to me, yes, I would. I mean, he was there. He was 2018. Ryan Kelly was kind of had a bit of an injury riddled season. He was out a few games. One game that stands out to me from back when Bane was on the roster was the game in Houston. The Colts were, I think, 9-6. They had just come off of that awful loss to Jacksonville. Don't even get me started on that. And then you have a guy like Bane that comes in and replaces Kelly, and I think he performs extremely well. Given the circumstances, if the Colts lose that game, I think they're 8-6. You go to 8-7, and your chances to make the playoffs sort of dwindle because of how well Houston's playing in Tennessee as well. So yeah, no, he played well. Obviously, he played under Googe, who was the former offensive line coach. So, but I think he could come in and potentially be the backup to Ryan Kelly again. I think I'll put it this way. I think it would be wise. It would be smart on the Colts end to bring in a guy who has some familiarity with the offense, with the scheme, to back up Ryan Kelly. Because as of right now, other than Danny Pinter, who I think is more of a guard and less of a center, they don't really have a backup at center. So yeah, I think Bame should definitely be considered.
Yeah, I guess my only question is the Colts traded him for basically essentially nothing when they traded him to the Miami Dolphins. I think it was like a 7th-round pick or something. So does the scheme change from Googe to Chris Strauser? Does that really kind of amplify his game, or does that kind of show his weaknesses even more? Maybe the Colts felt like that, and that's why they released him or traded him at rather. So that's my only question. Does he fit well with the blocking scheme? I don't know. It would be an interesting thing to look at. Nomadic Brian says, been hearing through training camp, Patman's hands and just getting the ball. In my mind, I'm seeing a guy that you can go to when you need a bailout. What are your thoughts?
Yeah. I mean, I'll kind of go back to what Jim said earlier with Desmond Patton. If Michael Pittman goes down, you have no backup that is capable of going up and catching those 50-50 contested balls, and has the ability to be more physical than maybe some of the smaller receivers like an Ashton Doolin or Zach Pascal. I think he's 6'1", I believe. I could be wrong.
Yeah.
But with Patman, back with what Jim said earlier, he was there in person. He witnessed it. Pardon me. He said that essentially Patman's could potentially be a better player than what most people expected. As he also mentioned, this was obviously a historically deep wide receiver class, and so Patman obviously fell, and the Colts got him in the 6th round. And I think that he's come in. And to make this 53-man roster, Cody, this is something that we've mentioned, not with just wide receivers, but with the every single position. The Colts have a problem that they haven't had in years. And that's the fact that they've got so much talent and depth within their roster that it was going to be hard, to cut players and to part ways with guys like Jim said and what you said, guys that you think have potential, that you think can play well in your scheme. And so I think to say that Patman made the 53-man roster, I think speaks volumes to what Jim was saying in terms of the player that he could potentially be, his route running ability, and the ability to, like I said, if Michael Pittman were to go down, be that replacement for that big body wide receiver. Because, as you and Jim mentioned, Devin Funchess didn't really work out. And if, and I try not to repeat myself here, but if Pittman goes down, you have nobody, and then you're in the exact same position that you were last year, where the offense, in a sense, could be somewhat limited because you don't have that big-bodied wide receiver. And we know Phillip Rivers has thrived off of having big-bodied wide receivers in his career, whether it's Vincent Jackson, Mike Williams, even. So yeah, to me, Patman, I think has a chance to surprise a lot of people.
Colts Yank says, love the content. Appreciate you guys. Thank you, sir. We really appreciate that nice comment. Let's see here. FaZe says, we can smoke the Jags with our backups. I mean,
don't use it, please.
Considering what Jacksonville is doing, I know that's not the most ludicrous statement in the world. I never heard your thoughts, Andrew, on just the blow up that Jacksonville has had this offseason. I mean, you talk about tanking, but not saying you're tanking. I mean, Jacksonville is essentially doing that.
no NFL team is ever going to come out and say that we're tanking because that looks bad for your fan base and you potentially lose money. And especially in a year with what you have in COVID, you're already going to be at a limited capacity in terms of the number of fans. You certainly don't want to come out and say, by the way, we're tanking on top of COVID and everything, because then you're not going to have you're going to have even less fans, I should say. At least that's my opinion anyway. But with what Jacksonville's doing, I've said before on the podcast, Cody, I think Bill O'Brien is just an awful, awful GM. I don't have to get into the reasons why. We all know based on the moves that he's made. Before they signed Deshaun Watson, pardon me, to that healthy contract extension a few hours ago, I was talking to my brother last night, and I thought to myself, he sure as heck could potentially trade Deshaun Watson for a bag of potato chips and a bag of M&Ms. I mean, he's awful. He's awful. I'm not trying to make corny jokes, guys. Sorry, but he's awful. Anyways, but with Jacksonville, they're obviously tanking. They're obviously in a position where they're going to need a quarterback. Do you really know what you have in Gardner Minshew? You draft Leonard Fournette 3 years ago, 5th overall. Fourth overall. This is a top 5 draft pick. And you release him. You don't even try to. I mean, I guess they tried to trade him, and there wasn't any takers, which I think could potentially speak to maybe some issues that Leonard Fournette had. Again, that's pure speculation. I'm not trying to cause any problems or anything like that. That's just my opinion. That's pure speculation. But with what Jacksonville's doing, who knows? And I will say this, Cody. I think it's been 5 or 6 years since the Colts have won in Jacksonville. And if there's a year of all years to potentially go in, they're no longer Saxonville. You no longer have Calais Campbell. You no longer have Telvin Smith. You no longer have Yannick Ngakoue and Malik Jackson. Those guys that you had back when that 2017 defense was considered all-time great by many. And so I think if there's a year for the Colts to go in and start the season off right, I might also mention that the Colts, they haven't started 1-0 in I think since 2014 or 15. I may be drawing a blank, but it's been a while since they've actually won their first season opener. And so if there's an opportunity to not only win your season opener, but to go in and essentially, beat a team like Jacksonville, sort of break the streak of not being able to win in Jacksonville, it's this year. And I think you have to take full advantage of it.
Yeah, and I'm sick and tired of the Colts having to play catch up from week 1. Like, start out good. Like, I don't understand. It's just like, it's weird. I think it was against the Raiders. I think it was 2013, if I'm not mistaken. Terrell Pryor was their quarterback. Like, that's how long ago it was. So, yeah, it definitely is going to be big. And like you said, if there's a year the Colts can win in Jacksonville, it is definitely this year. The year when they're just, selling talent off for nothing, essentially. The Colts have to be. They have to. Like, they have to win. Like, it's not even like a question mark. Like,
no,
I'm not even saying, like, they have to win by 20, in my opinion. Like, it's just that to that point where I'm like, Jacksonville is clearly tanking. If you're not smoking them, we got some other issues.
Yeah,
so,
exactly. And the other thing I will say too, Cody, is last year, especially at the beginning of the season, we saw the Colts finish all these games with one possession wins, winning off of a final field goal or a 7-point lead. This year, I think that's certainly a headline to watch. Can the Colts go into these games with as well and as deep as this roster is, and it has been in years? Can they go in to these games throughout the season, and can they consistently win by double digits rather than single digits, whether 3 or 7 points? Because at the end of the day, in the NFL, if you can't win games by 10 or more points, and you're winning and you're constantly winning by single digits, I don't care what your record is. If it's 7 and if it's 5-2, if it's 6-2, if it's 8-1, if it's 9-0, that creates a problem.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and it's going to come back and bite you in the butt, like we saw last year with the Colts.
Yeah.
They started off super strong, but they weren't winning by more than a touchdown, and then the game's kind of swung the other way in the back half of the year. So definitely agree there. Steven says, I would have kept Windsor and cut Stallworth. As far as corner, we're already thin, and with Marvell Tell opting out, that really hurt our depth. I mean, yeah. I mean, the thing is, like, we can only go from speculation and what we hear. Ultimately, the Colts coaches, like, the Colts didn't just make this decision on a whim. Like, they know these players inside and out. And so they knew what the best, value was and the best guy they felt like for the roster. And so we don't know. We haven't seen practices, unfortunately. We haven't been able to go down there this year. So from all accounts, from what Jim was saying, Taylor Stallworth also was playing very well. So, and the good thing is Windsor's probably going to be under practice squad. So you're not really losing anybody, which is great. So I think, yeah, for me, I'm good with that, even though I was initially shocked. I thought they were going to keep Windsor on their 53-man, but yeah. And as far as corner, I mean, yeah, I think we're thin. They need to add another corner. Definitely would not mind adding one of those guys we already mentioned from Philadelphia, or adding another outside corner. I think the Colts definitely need to do that because, you have 4 guys that are pretty good. You feel good about that, but you don't really have another boundary corner, a bigger corner, really. So, especially if Xavier Rhodes doesn't pan out, you have really nobody.
Exactly.
So what are your thoughts, Andrew, on the corner position? And do you think the Colts need to address that somehow through free agency?
Yeah, as I mentioned earlier, it's a bit of a concern for me. Yeah, and I don't want to repeat myself because I know I mentioned this a little bit earlier, but as you mentioned, Cody, if Xavier Rhodes doesn't pan out, and he can't return to that 2017 All-Pro form that we saw in Minnesota, then that's a problem because now you only have Rocky Sean and then I'm trying to think TJ Carey, but as Jim and you mentioned earlier, TJ Carey was more of a player that was brought in to play in the slot, not on the outside. Now that's not to say that he can't play on the outside, but it's certainly a position to watch in the oncoming days, to see who the Colts bring back, who they have as their protected players for that practice squad. And it's bad corner play cannot be underestimated in the NFL. If, I don't care who you are, what your record is. If you have bad corner play, I'll put it this way, Cody. The Colts matched up against the Chiefs extremely well last season, and they beat the Kansas City Chiefs. But let's not hide the fact that they didn't have Tyreek Hill and that Patrick Mahomes wasn't injured halfway through that game. Those were 2 major factors as to why the Colts ended up pulling out that win on Sunday Night Football. But when you're going up against the teams, if you want to make the playoffs and you want to play against teams like Baltimore and Kansas City and Pittsburgh, guys that have speed and deep threats on their roster, you have to be able to have solid corner play. And if you don't, there's no way you're matching up against guys like those because it's just going to be a track meet. They're just going to burn you over the top all game long.
Right, for sure. Wow, there's 122 of you in here. Listen to our mod, Tristan, and hit that like button. Be sure to do that. If you aren't already subscribed to us, be sure to do that. As the season gets started, we're going to continue cranking out the Colts content, so we hope you'll join us. Scott, my friend Scott, what's up, Scott? He says, what are a couple players from cuts on other teams that the Colts should seriously consider? We already said Sidney Jones was one name that is kind of hot among like Colts fans. Do you have any other names that are of interest, Andrew, that you think potentially the Colts could sign or should look at signing?
One name comes to mind other than Sidney Jones, who I agree, Cody, I think the Colts should seriously consider bringing in. Former second-round pick, as we mentioned earlier, has a lot of potential, but he sort of has been he's had a lot of injuries, and obviously that's why he's no longer a part of Philadelphia, or at least that's part of the reason why. But Hale Hinches, I think I said his last name right. I botched that again probably. If I did, I apologize, guys. But now he's, as we mentioned earlier, he's got familiarity with the system. I'm not I don't want to say thrilled. That's not the right word. I'm slightly concerned with the depth at tight end right now because you have Trey Burton who's out for the next couple of weeks. You have Jack Doyle and you have Mo Alley Cox, but other than that, you don't have a third string tight end. And as Jim mentioned earlier, you have Frank Reich, who has at times last season come out in 3 and 4 tight end sets, and so we know how much he loves his tight ends, both he and Nick Sirianni both, and I think that the value that the tight end brings to this Colts offense cannot be understated, and I think that that's certainly a player to watch moving forward in the oncoming days.
Yeah, and we're gonna that's a good idea, Scott. We're gonna come out with a video probably this next week and potentially maybe even tomorrow. Depending on our schedules, on some players the Colts should consider to add from the cuts. We'll definitely come out with a video about that as well. Let's keep going here. There's somebody. I don't know what's going on.
Hey, Cody, I hate to cut you off, but I actually just got a text from my sister, and she is almost here with my niece, and I've got to help her bring some things in. So I think I may have to jet.
Gotcha. No problem. We'll head off then. thanks, guys, so much. We really appreciate it. If you haven't yet subscribed or liked, be sure to do that. We really appreciate it. Hope you enjoyed our look at the Colts' final 53-man roster. There's obviously going to be some tweaks that come in the next coming days and the next week. But this is the initial roster. Let us know your thoughts in the comments below when this video is published. Thank you guys so much. And as always, go Colts.